struggling rancher bought a girl labeled too wild for any man, but destiny had other plans. Montana Territory, spring of 1886. The sky burned gold over the open plains as the wind carried dust across miles of forgotten land. Ethan Cole, a 28-year-old rancher, stood by his broken fence, watching his cattle fade like his hopes. Each day felt heavier than the last. Debts rising, neighbors leaving, and storms tearing what little he had left apart. He wasn't a man who gave up easily, but the ranch that once echoed with life now stood silent, like a ghost of his father's dreams. Then came the day that changed everything, the auction in town. Amid the noise, the laughter and the smell of whiskey, a girl stood chained by the post, her dark eyes fierce and untamed. They called her too wild for any man. But something in her gaze stopped Ethan, cold. He didn't know why he raised his hand to bid. All he knew was that his fate had just shifted forever. The crowd at the auction murmured like restless thunder as Ethan stood near the back, hat low over his eyes, the scent of sweat, leather, and dust thick in the air. Men shouted bids for horses, wagons, and old tools, but none of it mattered to him. He had come for a worker, someone who could help him pull the ranch back from the edge before it slipped away completely. His money was barely enough and hope was running thin. Then the sheriff's voice cut through the noise, calling for bids on the last sale of the day. The crowd turned, and that was when Ethan saw her. A young woman stood beside the post, wrists bound in iron cuffs, clothes torn by travel and dirt, her eyes burning with something that wasn't fear. It was defiance. No one spoke. Men who moments ago had been shouting now looked away, whispering words like cursed and untamable. The sheriff said she'd been caught stealing horses, though some claimed she had ridden faster than any man alive. The way she stared at the horizon, proud and silent, made Ethan's chest tighten. There was something about her that didn't fit the stories being told. She didn't look like a criminal. She looked like someone who'd been fighting for her life far too long. The bidding started low, but no one moved. A few men laughed, one spat, another called her trouble no rancher needed. Ethan's heart pounded as if it already knew something his mind refused to admit. Against reason, against warning, his hand lifted. The sheriff's gavel hit the block and the air went still. Sold, to Cole of Dust Valley. The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, but Ethan barely heard it. The girl's eyes met his for the first time, dark as the coming storm, filled with questions and fury. She didn't thank him, didn't flinch, just stared as if trying to read the reason behind his choice. He didn't have one. Maybe it was pity, or maybe it was the way she refused to bow even with chains around her wrists. Whatever it was, it felt irreversible. When he took the rope from the sheriff, she walked behind him without a word, every step heavy with pride that refused to break. The road back to the ranch stretched long and empty under the dying sun, and Ethan could feel the weight of his decision growing with every mile. He had bought trouble, that much was certain, but there was something else too. A strange pull, a quiet sense that he had just stepped into a story that wasn't his alone. The wind rose again, carrying dust across the trail, and as he glanced back at her silhouette against the red horizon, he couldn't tell if he had rescued her or if she was the one who would end up saving him. The morning after they reached the ranch, silence hung heavier than the dust over the corral. Willa stood by the fence, her wrists free now but her spirit untouched, eyes fixed on the wild horses running across the open field as if she belonged among them. Ethan handed her a shovel, expecting a protest, yet she took it without a word and worked until her hands bled. She refused orders, not out of defiance but because she didn't seem to recognize the idea of being told what to do. When Ethan tried to guide her, she met his eyes with a look that froze the words in his throat. She was fast, fierce, and almost frightening in her silence. Within days, she could break a horse that no man could touch, ride through the storm as if the wind itself obeyed her, and fix a fence line before sunrise, while others still struggled with coffee. The ranch hands whispered about her, saying she had outlaw blood, or that she carried the spirit of the wild. One claimed he saw her talking to a Mustang like an old friend. Another swore he heard her singing to the wind at night. Ethan didn't believe in curses, but there was something about her that unsettled him. The way she stared at the horizon, like she was waiting for someone who would never return. Each night after the day's work ended, she sat by the barn fire sharpening her knife, her face lit by the glow, shadows flickering across eyes that had seen more than they should have. Ethan tried to keep his distance, yet the more he watched her, the more he saw not madness but sorrow, layered, quiet, buried deep beneath that unbreakable will. One evening, he caught her looking at an old photograph of his father that hung in the ranch house. She said nothing, only asked if he missed him. He nodded, and for a moment she softened, her voice barely a whisper as she said, "You don't lose land like this without losing pieces of yourself too." Then she walked away before he could reply. As the days passed, her strength became the ranch's lifeline. The herd began to recover, fences stood firm, and for the first time in years, the place breathed again. Yet rumors followed her everywhere, poisoning the air in town. People warned Ethan she would bring ruin, that she carried darkness no man could tame. But he had seen the truth behind her wildness, the way her hands trembled when thunder rolled, the scars that ran across her back, the haunted look in her eyes whenever someone mentioned the sheriff's men. Something terrible had shaped her, something she refused to speak of, and though Ethan didn't understand it yet, he knew that beneath the fire that kept her alive burned a story that could destroy them both, if ever it came to light. The sky turned black before sunset, and the air grew heavy with the taste of rain as thunder crawled over the hills like a warning. Ethan was fixing the barn gate when the wind roared, slamming it from its hinges. Willa was already outside, trying to pull the horses into shelter, her hair whipping across her face, eyes burning through the storm. Lightning tore the sky apart, and the world vanished in flashes of white and sound. The ranch groaned under the weight of the wind, roof tiles flying like knives, fences collapsing in waves. Ethan shouted her name, but the storm swallowed his voice. A beam cracked, falling toward him, and in the instant before it struck, she was there, slamming into him, knocking him to the ground as the beam shattered against the dirt where he had stood. The air filled with dust and thunder, and for a moment everything stopped. She was bleeding from her shoulder, yet she pulled him up, her voice calm and sharp, ordering him to move. Together they fought through the chaos, dragging the frightened horses inside, tying down whatever could still be saved. When the last door was bolted and the wind began to fade, Ethan looked at her, drenched, bruised, shaking but unbroken. And something in her eyes was different. The storm outside had ended, but another one was still raging within her. He asked who she really was, his voice quiet but certain, and this time she didn't look away. She took a deep breath and told him the truth she had buried for years. She wasn't a thief or a runaway. She was Willa Hart, daughter of Sheriff Samuel Hart, the man once feared and respected across 3 counties. Her father had stood against a group of powerful men who wanted to take the valley's land for railroads and gold. When he refused, they burned his home, killed his deputies, and left his family for dead. Willa survived only because he told her to run before they came. She had spent years hiding under false names, hunted by the same men who still ruled the towns and paid for silence. Her wildness wasn't rebellion, it was survival. Ethan stood frozen, the pieces falling into place, every scar and shadow in her eyes now making sense. She told him she came to the auction not by capture but by choice. She wanted to disappear where no one would look, among men who'd think she was nothing. But fate had other plans. Her voice trembled as she said she never meant to drag him into her past. Yet the moment he lifted that bid, she knew it would all return one day. The firelight flickered between them as thunder rolled away into the distance, and Ethan realized this woman who had saved his life had been running from death her whole own. Dawn broke over the ranch with the smell of wet soil and smoke still hanging in the air, the storm leaving behind broken fences and shattered roofs. Yet something unspoken had changed between them. Willa moved across the yard with quiet purpose, her injured arm wrapped in cloth, refusing rest as she gathered tools and wood. Ethan watched her, feeling the strange calm that follows chaos, and for the first time he saw her not as someone he had saved, but as someone who was saving him piece by piece. They worked without words, rebuilding what the storm had taken, their rhythm steady, hands raw, hearts steadying with every nail struck into wood. When she faltered, he steadied her. When his strength faded, she lifted the load without complaint. The ranch began to breathe again, fences rising like old bones finding life, and the horses once wild now followed Willa, as if they belonged only to her. Ethan taught her to read the ledgers, to trust that not every man was made of greed, while she taught him the kind of courage that isn't loud, but endures when everything else gives way. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch that had once been a place of loss became a symbol of survival. Townsfolk who once called her cursed began to speak her name with quiet awe, watching her ride through the main street with her chin high and dust trailing behind her like pride itself. Children waved as she passed, and even the sheriff's office dared not meet her eyes for long, as if they saw in her the ghost of justice that had once ruled their land. Ethan rode beside her more often now, not as a master beside a worker, but as an equal sharing the same wind. At dusk, they rode along the valley ridge, the sun burning red across the horizon, silence between them rich with everything unspoken. One evening, as they watched the herd move below, he asked her if she would ever stop running. She smiled faintly and said, "I stopped the day you didn't ask who I used to be." That night the air was warm, the stars sharp as silver, and the ranch seemed alive again, not because it had been repaired, but because it had found a heartbeat. Rumors faded, replaced by stories of a girl who could tame storms, and a man who had learned to stand beside her instead of ahead. They were no longer two lost souls bound by chance. They were partners carved from hardship, equal in fire and faith. As the wind swept across the plains, Willa looked toward the horizon, her voice steady as she said the land finally felt like home. And for Ethan, that was all the truth he would ever need. The night they came for her. The sky was silent, no wind, no moon, only the sound of hooves cutting through the dark. Willa stood at the barn door, rifle steady, heart calm, Ethan beside her with fire in his eyes. The men who had once hunted her rode in believing she was still the girl who ran, but the woman waiting for them had already faced every kind of loss and lived through it. The first shot cracked like thunder, echoing across the valley, and in that moment the ranch became their battleground. When the dust settled and the dawn broke red, the men lay scattered, their power gone with the night. Willa stood in the light, breathing hard, eyes wet but unbroken. Ethan took her hand, and for the first time she didn't look back. The past was buried behind them, and the life she fought for finally belonged to her.